I've been working with bananas for years, and I've never been afraid of fruit. What scared me was the silence at 5:47 in the morning inside the warehouse, that empty metallic hallway, the cold air cutting through my fingers, the pallets lined up like soldiers waiting for orders. I knew where every sound should be, the beep of the scanner, the screeching of a forklift tire, the still hoarse voice of the driver asking for coffee. That day, the sound that started my shift wasn't any of those. It was the sound of the seal cracking against the metal of the container, a crack I'd heard hundreds of times. But that morning it came with something else, a silence that responded back, like a room holding its breath. The driver joked, "It's just bananas, partner." And I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. There was a smell in the air that wasn't green fruit. It was a sickly, sweet, warm scent that didn't fit the cold of the warehouse. I signed for the delivery, leaned my shoulder against the panel and pulled open the doors. When I say I saw scales, no one believes me at first. They say memory invents details to explain the shock. I remember the sound first, not the image. A heavy, muffled slide like a wet tarp dragging across metal. But there was no tarp there. There were boxes, stretch plastic, wood, and for a second that seemed to stretch. The container breathed. The driver swallowed hard, and I felt my body lean back on its own as if the ground had retreated. The light from the hallway sliced through, cutting the darkness of the container and catching dust in the air. And it was in that dust that I saw the reflection, not of plastic, not of a label, but of an eye. A damp, golden gleam that reflected the light back with delay, as if the container had pupils. I could have closed the door right then and called someone, but my hand didn't obey. I pulled the doors until they opened fully, and the smell came all at once, warm, sweet, heavy, the kind of smell that sticks in the throat's memory. The pallet at the back was slightly sunken, as if the weight was different, and between the stacks of boxes, a space that shouldn't have existed. A clean channel opened by something that wasn't a forklift or a loading error. A line. I said, "There's something alive in there." And the driver tried to laugh again, but his voice came out smaller. I took 2 steps back and did what we do when we want to feel useful and safe at the same time. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam entered the container, swept over plastic, found wood, and shone on water droplets on the cold wall. And then it cut through a texture that didn't belong in this world of boxes. Scales. Not like in the documentary. Wet, perfect, but dust-covered, still alive, in a slow curve, like a resting muscle. The driver said, "It's a snake," as if naming it would solve it. I heard my own heartbeat in my ear, as if it had climbed outside to warn me it was present. I took a step back, unwittingly offering the path to it, and it moved, not fast, never fast. The sound wasn't one of shock, it was one of certainty. A heavy drag crossing the entire stage, from the back to the mouth of the container, with the calm of someone who knows the space belongs to them. A box hit another, plastic snapped, and the head appeared between the central column of boxes, making its way through with the slightest movement. I'd seen snakes before, in videos, photos, news about people finding things in fruit, but seeing a python's head less than 3 meters away, with its mouth opening slowly in a dry exhale that feels like it's stealing the air from your throat, is something else. It didn't attack. It just warned. The driver tripped over a wooden slat. I grabbed his arm by reflex and said, "Don't run." And I don't know where that voice came from, obeying when my body wanted to break free. Its tongue flicked out and in, a black line examining the metal and us, as if it were sniffing the path between the 3 of us. My whole world shrank to the flashlight beam, to the eyes that glowed where the light hit from the side, and to the pale certainty that I was 3 steps away from something that could embrace me without arms and erase my name from the shift. I thought about the protocol no one ever follows until they need it. Isolate the area, stop traffic, turn off the noise, call wildlife control. I thought about closing the doors again, but the head was already on the threshold, and I saw the thickness of its neck and understood that no door would be a barrier if it wanted the street. "Stay," I told the driver, and it was ridiculous, as if I were commanding in a shock, but he stayed. The forklift at the back shut off. Someone asked from a distance if everything was okay, and I could only say, "Don't come," with my hand open in an old gesture, like holding back the tide. If you think fear makes us scream, you don't know the fear that wants to listen. I needed to hear every inch of dragging, every creak of wood inside the container, every breath that wasn't mine. And in that darkness, cut by the flashlight, with the sweet smell swallowing the cold, I understood that this load wasn't just bananas. It was a traveling body, an animal that had crossed more borders than I had, that had slept in the heat of boxes and woken up in my shift. And now it was there, asking with its body if the road continued outside. I've been a receiving clerk for 7 years, and if there's one thing this job teaches you, it's how to listen. Most people think checking is about numbers, labels, barcodes. It is too. But before every beep, there's a sound that tells you whether the load will be a problem. The vibration of the truck when it pulls up, the way the container door responds to the first touch, the silence after the seal. I've learned to appreciate these signals because they make the night make sense. The shift starts when the world still hasn't decided to wake up, and the warehouse feels like an overly polished city. Straight lines, clean metal, everything modular. We cling to the floors because they remind us that there's life beneath the steel. That week we had been receiving heavier fruit shipments because of the summer heat. The bananas arrive green, closed, tied to time, waiting for our cold storage to tell them when to ripen. Each container is a promise and a threat. A promise of product delivered on time, a threat of something that has crossed half the continent to be there, and sometimes brings the continent with it. We talk about silly stories to get through the nights. The truck driver who sleeps, the guy at the dock who likes AM radio, the supervisor who swears he sees shadows when he's alone. Because when there's no story, sleep creeps up the back of your neck and you become dead weight in the loudest place in the world. I had a routine, and routine is what saves you. Arrive, clock in, grab the vest, test the scanner. Stop by Dock 3, wave at Henrique on the forklift, with a gesture he understands without needing to turn his head. Check the seal, verify the manifest. Look at the temperature on the container's external sensor. Anyone who works with cargo learns that numbers lie when they want to, but smell never lies. And that morning, the smell won. The sensor read cold, but the air that escaped with the first opening had the heat of a living creature. The driver was new to our yard, with a country accent and sweat streaming down even in the cold. "Brought some good bananas," he said, with pride I respect, because everyone carries what they have to call their own. I wanted to believe him. The seal broke with a crack and the world paused. Anyone who has opened an empty container knows there's an echo that returns, metal sound, a breeze that enters like, "Excuse me." That wasn't the case here. The silence settled in. I'll be honest, the first explanations my mind tried to offer were the ones you see in light news stories. A possum, big rat, lizard. The brain always tries to shrink danger to fit in our pocket. I had read, like everyone else, that sometimes snakes show up in banana boxes, stories that make people laugh or cringe, but end with, they caught it and released it in the right place. I hadn't seen one until then, and still my body, which doesn't read the news, already knew. What I felt in the air wasn't a rat. The structure of the container began to take on the wrong shape as soon as the light entered. I like to observe the geometry of the load, how the pallet was tied, the care in the curve of the stretch film, the distance between the box rails. It's like reading the handwriting of someone who wrote a text without paper. Some loaders make art, others make quick fixes, and we learn to recognize them. The pallet at the back was someone meticulous, nothing out of place. Just a sinking that wasn't the wood. It was what lay beneath the boxes. I followed with the flashlight and saw between the plastics a clean stripe, as if something had passed repeatedly. No claw marks, no gnawed pieces. There was a path. I whistled for Henrique, a short sound meaning, "Set the silent mode on this side of the warehouse." He turned off the forklift, and real silence is always loud when it arrives. The driver stood by my side as if we were kids seeing the sea for the first time. I took a deep breath and heard myself breathing, which is always a bad omen. I put my phone between my fingers, flashlight on, and took a step inside. I aligned my feet with the painted lines on the ground, as if staying within them would protect me. Light on the first column. Box, box, box. Light on the second. Box, clean stripe. plastic snapping. Light on the third. And it was there that the beam caught the curve of a body. There's no other way to say it. A long, thick, coiled body, resting. Yellow and brown scales, road-worn, alive with muscle. The head was still out of my angle. I saw segments, texture, the world cut into little shocks that add up to a big one. The driver said damn, but not damn. He said something shorter, something between fear and the desire to seem brave. I felt like saying calm down, and I said it, as if my voice were a work tool. And then the body moved an inch too. The container responded with a dry snap from the beam, remembering what was once a tree. I stepped back, and the space became the size of the flashlight beam. I know it sounds exaggerated, but I swear for an instant the entire warehouse shrank to just the three of us, me, the driver, and something that traveled hidden in the heart of a perfect load. I think a lot about this later. The idea of perfection, perfect palette, error-free manifest, time on the dot, and life finding a way to put a breathing floor into our design. The container didn't make a mistake. It only brought along what prefers heat and silence, and it found just that in the banana aisle. Somewhere on the road, at some port, at some dawn like mine, an animal chose to sleep in our world of boxes and woke up on my shift. What comes after seeing scales in a container is not screaming, it's protocol. At least that's what I repeated to avoid shaking fingers. I took 2 steps back and made a gesture with my hand that I didn't even know I had. Palm open, fingers firm, a signal of no one crosses this invisible line. The warehouse has rules that become instinct with time. When product spills, you isolate. When glass breaks, you call for PPE. When you hear an animal, you stop being quick. I called the supervisor, my voice low as if the snake understood the phone. "Isolate Dock 3, I said. "There's an animal in the container." He asked, "What animal?" I replied, "Big." In the absence of species, I gave the size. The driver wanted to help, and that was what scared me more. People wanting to be useful is what pulls disaster closer. I asked him to stay, not out of courage, but because he was a witness. And a witness is something that makes others not doubt you later. He stayed with his hand in his pocket, eyes on the open door, and his courage was the same as mine. We stayed because we were glued to the ground by so much fear. The flashlight shook less when I rested my fist on the doorframe. I swept the light through the inside again, searching for the head that still hadn't looked at me. The body, I saw, segments that blurred into shadows until the beam hit them right. The head, no. Enrique appeared 5 meters away, stopped, raised his hands without asking. I signaled for him to turn off the motion alarms, reduce noise, and give the internal alarm. No forklift on Axis A. Dock 3 was in a bubble. The rest of the warehouse continued, distant. And that distance is what gives dimension to fear. You realize that life outside keeps going, beeping, pulling pallets, calling time, while your world shrank to fit inside a metal rectangle with the wrong smell. That's when the head appeared, slow like an old clock. Not like in the video with that editing jump that swallows distances. It came from the middle between boxes, the tongue marking the air, the eye returning the light with dirty gold. I couldn't identify the species, but the body conveyed weight, and the weight conveyed danger. Python. The word came without me wanting to play biologist. I wasn't a specialist, but I knew enough about cargo to understand when what's inside can kill what's outside. I heard my mouth say, "Don't move," and it was for me. The pressure of silence started to make noise. It was the first time I heard that dry exhale, which isn't quite breathing. It's a friction of presence. The head turned slightly, eyes sticking to the light, and I realized the beam was a rope between us. If I moved, I would pull. If I stayed still, I would calm. Her tongue came out again, longer, as if she were drawing the outline of the container and finding the geometry of the hallway. I knew that if she decided to go to the street, our world would end in sirens. There's always someone filming, always someone tripping, always someone running in the wrong direction. I needed to prevent the container from becoming the scene of the news, and I had nothing but my low voice and the borrowed courage of someone who has swept glass without gloves. The supervisor arrived. and I saw in his eyes the struggle between thinking it was an exaggeration and believing it. The snake resolved this dispute. The crack of a box being displaced by a body that doesn't ask permission is a language everyone understands. "Call wildlife control," he said without wasting time. "Now." The order came over the radio like water, and it was the only thing that calmed me. It wasn't just in my mouth anymore. I looked at the driver and saw sweat running down in a cold that should have prevented sweat. He didn't blink. No one blinks when there's an eye that doesn't blink looking at you. I'm not a hero, and I won't pretend to be here. I was scared of fainting and hitting my head on the edge of the door frame. I only had one job, to keep the door as a mouth and not as an exit. I held my position like someone holding their breath underwater. The head tested the limit. The tongue came to the edge of the light and the body behind moved slightly. I thought of things my grandmother used to say about animals, that they feel our fear, that we need to be a tree, not prey. I made myself into a trunk, braced my knee and locked my heel. And somewhere maybe it worked. The head stopped at the line. The minutes became liquid. Time, which in the warehouse is always made of steel, punched in, minutes counted, became elastic, stretching and snapping back. I heard someone far away say, "It's coming," and "it's coming" turned into an invisible rope pulling me not to collapse. I realized I was recording. My finger had pressed the button without asking me. The phone captured the sound of that dry exhale, the micro cracks between boxes, the small creak of metal. I didn't know why I was recording, but later I understood. Proving to myself that it happened would save me when my mind tried to protect me by lying. When the white truck entered the yard, the world regained its boundaries. Wildlife control. 2 people. A specialist with a look that had already disarmed many silences. He saw me on the doorframe, saw the head, measured the space, and said quietly, the phrase that put everything back in place. "We can do this. Stay firm." And I, for the first time, breathed deeply without apologizing to the air. The specialist had the body of someone who had learned to move without apologizing to space. He took a hook, a tube, a thick bag from the truck, and each item had the calm weight of something that knows what it is. He spoke little, as someone who knows that too much talk turns into noise, and noise breaks invisible ropes. "No sudden movements, no shouting, no cell phones flashing light into her face," he said, looking at me and the driver as if placing us on the same team, not outsiders. He climbed to the edge of the container with the precision of someone walking on a narrow bridge over deep water. The hook touched the container's internal beam, and that's when I learned a new language, the language of the house responding with wood that remembers being a tree, the metal saying, "I'm holding." The snake felt the touch as if it were on her own body. It wasn't that she got scared. It was like someone who's sleeping opens an eye to see if it's day or night. The hiss came low, dry, a sigh that warned, "I know there's another one." "It's a python," he said, almost like a technical note without drama. "Not native. Probably hitchhiked from the beginning of the chain. It's warm. The container was home." I felt the phrase settle like a chair on my chest. Home. A metal rectangle crossing oceans became a room for an animal that didn't ask for papers. And suddenly, my whole warehouse, with its cold lights and perfect lines, seemed like an extension of that room. I became small and necessary. He positioned the open bag at her flank, the tube ready, the hook light, and began a body conversation with the snake. What I call a conversation were minimal, almost invisible touches, inviting the head to accept a path. No pulling, no brute force. It was the opposite of what we think dealing with a dangerous animal is. There was no battle, there was negotiation, the politics of patience. Each time the hook touched the beam lightly, the snake tightened the world. The container creaked in a low arc, a metallic lullaby that only someone who's pressed their heart against cold steel has heard. The head moved 1 centimeter closer. He retreated slightly. The head came back. He offered the tube not as a trap but as a tunnel, and I saw for the first time that capturing was presenting a convincing exit. Her body behind followed with delay, which is the time it takes to say goodbye to the place where you slept. A box shifted, moved 2 fingers forward, the plastic snapped without tearing. The driver took an involuntary step back and bumped into my shoulder. I didn't complain. I needed someone to touch the world to believe I was in the world. "She's strong," he said, and in that sentence was both respect and warning. If she decides to go back, we let her and try again. I didn't ask how many times that again had already been done in his life. I just silently hoped that the new home seemed better than the old one. Her tongue came out again, lightly touched the metal of the tube, and for a long second stayed in the air, as if testing the future. The specialist waited. Waiting is the worst and the best verb when fear exists. It gives time for the mind to invent tragedies and gives time for life to choose not to fulfill them. When she finally moved a bit, the sensation was of the world unlocking. The tube swallowed the head with respect, and the bag waited like an open mouth that didn't bite. The body behind responded with inertia and memory. It coiled, squeezed harder, tried to find another beam, dragged a box, brushed against plastic. The specialist didn't rush. He murmured a "that's it" so low that almost only he heard it. He followed the force with the hook, like someone following a song they don't want to go off track. The turn I feared happened in a way that even cinema doesn't think about. The snake, bothered by the new direction, descended 1/2 meter outside the container, using the door frame as a beam, and the head, already in the tube, pushed the air from my hallway. I saw her mouth open again, that dry exhale knocking the wind out of my stomach, and the body drew an arc that for seconds turned the dock into a jungle. The specialist kept the tube steady, adjusted the angle, and I saw a force that wasn't against the snake. It was with her in the sense of finding the line where the animal doesn't see aggression, only a narrow path. In the battle between fear and method, method won by a small margin. The snake tried to use the boxes as return steps, and he took those stairs apart with the tip of the hook, dismantling her supports. There was no rush. There was insistence, and each insistence was followed by a rest, like someone respecting the other's breath. I learned something there that I'll carry forever. It's not force that solves what scares us. It's patience that finds where force agrees to follow. When the head finally passed through the tube and disappeared into the bag, the entire warehouse let out a collective sigh that I heard without hearing. The body, still very much, still long, gave way in parts, each curve saying goodbye to the beam it had held, each scale scratching memories into the metal. The bag received it. The zipper waited for the moment to not harm. And when the metallic fastener ran with a long click and then a short one, I swear the air changed in density. It wasn't just relief. It was a home returning the ceiling to its original job, covering bananas. The climax wasn't a "we got it," it was a "let her in." The body yielded in a way I didn't expect from something that is pure muscle. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the intelligence of knowing when the fight becomes a waste of energy. The thick fabric of the bag dragged on the container floor with a sound like screen against stone, and the wood responded with a deep, almost musical arc. I felt the hairs on my arm lower like grass after the wind. The specialist closed the bag with a fastener that's not the kind you find on a backpack. It's the kind someone who deals with living force uses. Double, secure, designed by someone who made a mistake once and decided not to repeat it. He looked at me as if checking if I was still in place. I was, but I needed to sit down, and I didn't. There was a silly dignity in staying standing until the end, as if abandoning the doorframe early would be disrespectful to what we had held. He made a gesture for me to move aside to open a path. 2 steps back, the driver following me, the bag meeting the dock floor with a weight that seemed almost human in its presence. I watched with my eyes as if they were holding the handle. The path to the truck was slow, not because of a lack of strength, but because of an excess of care. The bag, even closed, was a conversation that could restart at any moment if we got the grammar of the movements wrong. He placed the volume in the prepared compartment, locks that are not from a soap opera, but from the real world, where a failure becomes a tragedy. I noticed something strange. There was no disgust, no anger. There was respect. Respect for a life that took the wrong path to be right. Heat, silence, easy food. Our warehouse offers all of that, and we pretend we only deliver product. The supervisor ran after with paperwork, and paperwork in these moments is always inadequate. He wanted to sign, protocol, someone called the press, someone asked if they could film. Someone had already been filming from the start with a cell phone hidden in the palm. I looked at the specialist and saw in his eyes a silent request of, "Don't turn this into a show." I did what I could. I turned my back on the screens and asked Enrique to hold the perimeter with people, not with tape. People understand people. Tape only attracts curiosity. When the truck started, the sound of the engine seemed profane. I needed a few more seconds of the sound of the bag dragging to believe it was over. I got them. He still adjusted the volume, as if settling a passenger who deserves not to hit their head. The door closed and the world regained its usual sounds. Beep, voice, tire. I didn't trust them at first. Familiar sounds become suspicious after hearing the unbelievable. It was only when I touched the doorframe and felt the cold metal without the warmth of the animal that I allowed my body to react. My legs became light, my arms heavy, my sight brightened for a second, and the air came in too eagerly. I almost laughed, and there was no reason to laugh except for the silly mechanism we have to avoid crying in front of others. The driver swore, but not as an insult. It was a prayer. I put my hand on his shoulder and felt his shirt wet. "You held it together," he said. I shook my head. We held the silence. The specialist returned, secured the bag better, signed with a pen that seemed heavy from habit, and gave me an explanation that felt more like a ghost story told with statistics. Snakes, hitch rides, heat, shelter, potential food. They come hidden between boxes near the engine in the insulation. They come from far away. We see a few each year. It's not always a python. Sometimes it's another, a colubrid. Today it was. He didn't promise a destination. He said, "It will be evaluated, identified, and redirected." I wanted to ask where to, but held back. It wasn't my story from then on. The warehouse returned to its rhythm like a heart that finds its beat after an arrhythmia. The supervisor cracked a joke to lighten the mood. Someone offered coffee. Someone asked if I was going to post the video. I said no, not out of heroic ethics, but because I knew no image would translate the sound of that dry exhale and the crack of the boxes, and I needed to keep something to myself that proved I was there. And because a show turns respect into laughter, and I didn't want that for her, even though she had taken the ground from under me. I walked to the end of the corridor, ran my hand along the wall, and for the first time, felt gratitude for the steel architecture. It's strange to thank metal, but I did. The container became again what it was, a passage box. The dock became what it had always been, the dock. I sat for 2 minutes on the step no one sits on and let my body tell me everything it had held while my head narrated. A fine tremor in my forearm, cold sweat on my back, that exhaustion that feels like fever. I was whole, and more importantly, no one was hurt. The warehouse survived a chapter that wasn't in the plan. In the following days, Dock 3 became the topic, a joke, a legend. "It's the snake dock," someone wrote on the board, and I erased it not out of censorship, but because the joke creates a distance I didn't want between me and what had happened. I didn't want to turn something still living in the corners of my ear into folklore. The smell took a while to go away. The cold storage solved almost everything, but some smells refused to dissolve in air conditioning. I would pass by and remember. It wasn't trauma, it was an alert memory. We installed more cameras, not to film something new, but to regain trust in what we call routine. I read and reread the reports, training with wildlife control, new checklist, unusual odor, clean strip between pallets, silence trapped in the opening. It seems like a joke, but we even formalized silence. That's what we do with fear. We turn it into a checklist to fit in the vest pocket. The supervisor called me into the office and said the press wanted to talk. I said I'd prefer not to. He respected that. The story was going to come out anyway, and if it came out through the mouth of someone who hadn't seen, it might hurt less. I went back to opening containers a few days later. My hand hesitated at the seal, and hesitation became part of the procedure. I opened it, pulled the doors, and the echo returned to being an echo. The wind returned to asking, "Excuse me." I stayed a few seconds longer, listening to the nothingness, and for the first time, The nothingness sounded like nothing. For the first time, I thought that the house can become a house again after sheltering another life, but the body doesn't forget at the speed the head decides. The cameras did their job until they no longer needed to. Most of the alerts were wind, a cat, a forklift shadow, a worker stepping outside the yellow line, and in the midst of it all, on some nights, the yard camera caught a small animal searching for fruit scraps, a curious raccoon, a cat that had adopted the warehouse as its territory. Life. The world isn't as clean as we draw it. The world touches, scratches, breathes together, and we're the ones who don't like to remember. I was slowly accepting that my job was a negotiation with the unpredictable, and that morning I had won only because patience had been greater than panic. It was on a Thursday morning at 3:14 a.m. that my phone vibrated with an alert that wasn't the kind we ignore. The app showed movement, external yard, camera 2, fine rain streaking the image, streetlight making circles on the wet ground. I tapped to zoom in, expecting to see the box cat or a plastic bag dancing. What I saw was a shadow moving without obeying the wind. Long, low. The kind of movement the eye recognizes before admitting it. It climbed up the base of the fence with a fluidity that wasn't from a small mammal. Disappeared behind the eaves. The audio, even bad, caught a light slide, almost shy, like a word whispered to oneself. And then, finally, a hiss. Distant, as if testing if the house still remembered its name. I sat on the bed with the phone in my hand, the whole room still, the whole world still. I didn't go to the warehouse. It wasn't my shift. It wasn't my job. I just stayed there listening again like I had heard so many sounds that morning, and I understood something that seems simple now. What we call the end is just a change of address for fear. It doesn't disappear. It learns another way. The next day, at coffee, someone said a dog had been barking all night in the back street. Someone joked, "It's the snake looking for a job." I smiled without enthusiasm, not because I thought it was impossible, because I knew that possible doesn't mean likely, and likely doesn't comfort the part of me that saw eyes returning the light. I passed by Dock 3, touched my palm to the doorframe, and thanked metal again for being metal. We need things that don't remember, for when the body remembers too much. If this story made it here with someone still listening along with me, I just want to ask a question that's not a test of courage, but of honesty. When the seal cracks and silence responds, would you open the door all the way? Or would you close it and call someone else to be the protagonist of your night? Comment the word ride if the sound of the dry exhale is still in your head. I read it. And if something moves in the corner of your ear today, wait a second before deciding what it is. Sometimes it's just the world remembering that it breathes. Sometimes and sometimes not. Like comment "I stayed until the end" and subscribe now. The best comments may appear in the next Serpent Shadows video.